Hey guys, welcome to The Bottom Half is Red. I'm your host, Baron Longstreth, and I am excited to bring to you a show that is going to give you some thought-provoking discussions. It's going to give you some expert insights to both encourage and some practical steps for how to build an organization that can more effectively introduce the world to Jesus Christ. So what is The Bottom Half is Red? It's all about building a culture of excellence. It's about growing your unique and creative identity. And it's about carrying out the will of God at any cost. So you're going to see that through practical teaching tips, developing a culture of giving, creating branding and marketing, or even methods to help guests feel safe and welcomed. This podcast is going to have you covered. But before we dive into today's episode, I want to take just a moment and extend a special invitation to all of our dedicated listeners. If you're looking to get even more involved in our community and gain some access to some behind-the-scenes stuff, become a Patreon supporter. And you can find that link in the episode description or even on Patreon. Just visit The Bottom Half is Red. Listen, we can't wait to welcome you on board and to share this exciting journey. Now, let's jump into today's episode. Hey, welcome everybody to The Bottom Half is Red. I am your host, Baron Longstreth. Hope you've been enjoying the podcast so far. And we have another great guest. In fact, this is his second time on the program. Did such a fantastic job the first time. We had to have him back. And in fact, I think our executive producer went ahead and scheduled him while we had him on the first podcast. And this is something that when I thought about some content and we started laying the fabric of how the seasons would go, this was something that I thought when I knew what the content was going to be, this is something that I said, I know who needs to speak on this subject matter. I've witnessed it with my own eyes, and he may not consider himself, he's probably not going to be very, very receptive to this compliment, but he is an excellent communicator, especially when it comes to the topic of conflict resolution. And I've got my friend, in fact, my best friend, Justin Anthony, pastoring in the Omaha area and pastors a fantastic church. And we welcome you back, Pastor Justin. Thank you again for committing your time and knowledge, and we appreciate you being on the program, man.
Well, it's a high honor of mine, Pastor Baron, and also to honor David Tanderup and all the work he's doing with you. And I'm just honored to be invited back, especially for this relationship. You're in my relationship. It's just a godsend. And the path of ministry is one that it's just so much sweeter when God allows someone in your life to travel a little ways down the road together. And so I give honor to you, your family, the church today that helped sponsor this, and just again, high honor to talk with you today.
Well, bro, I appreciate you very much, man. And we do go way back. We've traveled hundreds of thousands of miles together, and many more to come in Jesus' name. Today, Justin, we have, I would call it would be a deep subject and probably an uncomfortable subject. As leaders, this is something that we are all going to be faced with, the necessity to either enter into this with no type of, I'll call it like a premeditated thought process, just blindly, or to enter it with some biblical perspective and some, I think, beyond practical tips, but we'll call them practical tips. I think these are things that if we can execute, we're going to be better. And we need to be better as leaders. And this is something that is incredibly important to us, especially in the field that you and I are in. This is a challenge that we face. This is something that you can find in family. You can find this in any vocation. It's not limited to ministry. It's not limited to church. But it is something, it is a buzz subject, in all honesty, but it's something that I feel like that you can't talk about enough. And so what we want to do today, just for our audience, normally this ends up more of in a conversation between the two. Today, we're going to just give Pastor Anthony the floor. And from time to time, he might strike a chord within me, and I'll go ahead and do my best to ask an appropriate question. But Pastor Justin, we want you to take your time today, go through what you have, and just educate us, inspire us. We want to be better leaders. So help us be better leaders on the subject of confrontation.
Well, again, just so honored to be here. The Art of Confrontation. I want to say at the very beginning, a good book that I read several years ago and even turned into several teaching points for our leadership team was a book entitled Crucial Conversations, Tools for Talking When Stakes Are High.
That's an amazing book.
Yeah, written by Kerry Patterson. So he lines out several things. I did not pull any of my statements today from there, but I do believe that helped me understand some of the goals and the targets whenever you're dealing with conflict and conflict that requires confrontation. I want to say, first of all, that life, as you mentioned, is full of conflict. Life has conflict in it. Conflict is a part of life.
Yeah.
I don't know that you could really say you're alive and breathing if there isn't conflict. I'm amazed at people that come in for counseling that there's a conflict in their marriage. And the problem is that they don't know how to confront the conflict properly. They're surprised that there is conflict first and foremost in their marriage. And I'm reminded of 1 Corinthians 7:28, where Paul says that if you marry, there's going to be trouble.
Uh-huh.
So, in every relationship that we have, there is conflict. Then when conflict is there is the opportunity for confrontation. It doesn't mean that just because conflict is there, anytime there's conflict that you put on your helmet and you grab your sword and you go swinging your sword just because it's conflict. And so I by no means chase conflict, but I think confrontation has a place to answer a question. What is the importance of confrontation in personal and professional relationships? I believe when you say relationship, I think really it's difficult for me to really identify in a relationship way if there are unspoken, unresolved things under the surface. It's hard for me to feel like I can have a deep relationship with someone when I don't deal with conflict, when we're not able to talk about the things that are maybe in us. Maybe they're not massive, detrimental, but the more I'm able to talk with you, Baron, about things in my heart that are frustrating me or situations that I may or may not agree with, I don't feel like those things hinder our relationship. I feel like those things deepen our relationship.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And allowing us to be real with each other. And I really feel like authenticity is somewhat of a dinosaur in our culture. Everything is, an inch deep and a mile wide. And so it's just visibility. And if there's any issues or any things that are negative, well, let's hide those things. Let's sweep those under the carpet. Let's not talk about really what we're feeling. And because we're people and we don't think the same way and we don't act the same way and we don't like the same things. And those things aren't necessarily bad. So I know that conflict is in every place, everywhere you go. I often laugh and chuckle within myself that when we think about church growth, people often will say, "Oh, I really want my church to grow. I want to have revival." And wow, let's just reach for this. And let's say they have 50 people, God's blessed them with 50 people. And, I don't know what the numbers are, but fictitiously churches, 50 have one major conflict all the time.
Mm.
They have, and something needs to be confronted at a certain level at a pastorate of 50 people or a leader of 50 people. Well, if you want revival, let's go to 100. Well, what you're really saying is I want two major conflicts going on all the time. And I want to be able to have to engage in confrontation at the next level and so on and so forth. So a church of 50 has the same problem. A church of, 300 or 400, in my experience, we just have more conflict,
Right.
which is the managing of conflict through proper confrontation, through, again, I think the wisdom of the Lord, when and where do we address it, what can be addressed, what can't be addressed. Part of the fundamental problem in churches is carnality, and carnality itself, it brings in 1 Corinthians, Paul says, I couldn't come to you as unto spiritual, but unto carnal, because there's strife and contention. And so there is a certain part, at least in this organism called the Church of the Living God, that confrontation is born of the flesh. And so, you have to confront that. You have to deal with those things. You have to step in. And 2 Timothy chapter 2 says that the servant of the Lord must not strive, but be gentle, apt to teach, instructing those that oppose themselves, if peradventure God would grant them the acknowledging of the truth. So, there's confrontation. There's confrontation all through the Bible. To fight the good fight of faith is actually conflict. And if you're going to live the life of faith, you're going to have to confront the things in your life. You're going to have to deal with them. So it's laced all throughout the Bible. It's laced all throughout our lives, conflict. But then the concept of confrontation or confronting those things is very, very important. And confrontation is actually looking conflict in the face. It's turning toward the conflict and saying, okay, this one needs to be addressed. I'm going to approach this one. I'm going to deal with this one. Let me say a couple of things. Failing to confront the conflict in our lives breeds confusion, oftentimes. Confronting the conflict, whether in the church or in a business or in my marriage, confronting the conflict in the right way brings clarity and closeness.
I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I think for our audience sake that it would be great to just dig right there, just a hair, unless you're going to explain it out further.
Yeah, so when we fail to confront the conflict in our lives, it lets the unspoken be what directs the organization, the relationship, and the destiny. I'm going to talk about it later, but the assumptions then begin to rule rather than clarity.
Yeah.
And so confrontation actually helps us understand where are the boundaries. And in a relationship, boundaries are very, very vital. In an organization, boundaries are crucial. In fact, if there's no boundaries, then we have no, I don't know. I don't know if we have a relationship. I don't know if we have any clear goal or vision or values. And so all of these things are dealt with in confrontation. If my wife never says to me, hey, you hurt my feelings over here, that's a conflict that we had. And yet she addresses that through confronting me. If she never lets me know that I'm hurting her feelings, then I can't understand, hey, how am I supposed to change, my action? I didn't mean to. So even in innocence and even in unassuming life and relationship with my wife, that confrontation is so vital for her and for me to be able to build something over time. So the failing to confront the conflict creates unspoken relational barriers and resentment. Whenever there's conflict, but it's swept under the rug, or no one is ever, it's not talked about, and it's not brought forward through confrontation, then it just creates, again, that unspoken barrier.
Yeah.
And even I've seen it breach great, deep resentment, whether on my part as the leader or on the part of the follower. Or the person that I'm trying to lead, if there's something in their life and they don't approach and we don't deal with it. I think that's why the Lord says, if any brother have an ought against another, go to him, confront the issue, because if you don't confront it, I think a conflict that's not confronted is the devil's playground.
Wow. And so you're going to give us some practical ways in which we as leaders or husbands or wives out there that can help in a healthy way deal with or approach conflict.
I'm going to try.
Okay, good.
I'm going to try to give you
Awesome.
a handful of things, but absolutely. And I think the Bible says that there's one description about the devil, that he is a accuser of the brethren. And so again, when conflict is left to its own, then we fill in the blanks, or Satan fills in the blanks. with accusations, with fear, with all of those things. So again, Jesus says, man, confront it. And there's the right spirit to have. There's the right attitude to have. We'll get into some of that. Confronting conflict is the foundation of honesty, is the foundation of trust, which I think is huge in a home, in a church, in an organization. And I think also confronting conflict reveals the character of the people involved. And not only when you step into confrontation does it help bring to light some things, but it also reveals strengths and weaknesses in me. It reveals strengths and weaknesses in the person. It reveals where we're falling short of the values that we say we believe and are pursuing. And so it actually puts to the test the fruit of the Spirit in my life. In fact, people would say, yeah, I'm growing in God, but the greatest test for growth in the Lord is not absence of confrontation, but it's in the midst of those things. And so what does Peter say? Beloved, think it not strange concerning the fiery trial, which is to try you as though some strange thing has happened unto you. And so James echoes those sentiments in saying, hey, count it all joy when you fall into diverse temptations, and the trying of your faith brings forth patience and all of these things. And so confrontation, if you look at conflict as something to be avoided and you just run from it, I think we're missing opportunities to strengthen and deepen relationships, clarify where God wants us to go in these last hours. I think again, in the how-tos and what do we do to try to ensure those things, we'll step into some of those today. But progress is built upon the successful navigation through confrontation, not the avoidance of confrontation.
That's good.
Key principles. And what are some key principles of constructive confrontation, or confrontation is good? I think first and foremost, as a leader, I have to know what the real issue is. Just because I'm upset or frustrated doesn't necessarily mean that I just run into a confrontation. I really need to define the parameters of, as a leader, why am I frustrated? Or what is the real problem? What is the barrier? If it's in them or if it's in me. Sometimes people get frustrated and they'll come to me and they're just a big ball of emotion. Well, I try to send them back. Okay, take a piece of paper, and I don't know what to do with your emotion. I can't process all of that, but go back and write on a piece of paper, really, what is the problem? Or maybe in the meeting, I say, okay, let's find out what really is the cause of this burr in your saddle. Where is that coming from? Because I know people, and I've worked around people enough, and you'll probably identify with this, is the problem is never the problem.
Yeah.
There's always something that many people don't first do the hard work necessary to really find out what is at the root of this conflict or at the core of this conflict. And I remember I walked around the church. There was a guy who was a youth pastor for a while here. And I remember I was walking around and I got so frustrated. There was a conflict between he and I. And every time I'd see him, I would just be full of this resentment, and I didn't understand what's going on. And finally, I sat down and I said, okay, where is this frustration coming from? I don't like feeling this way. And I refrained from confronting this man because I didn't even know what the issue was in me, not in him, but in me. And so I said, okay, I got to know what, in this case, what my issue was. And just because I'm pastor doesn't mean that every time I've got an issue, I'm going to go, chase somebody down the hallway. I got to realize, what is that? And so I prayed and I asked God, and I did some introspection, and I said, okay, well, where's this frustration coming at? And what I found was, for me, that frustration is born in the womb of unmet expectations. And so where's frustration born at in you or in me? It's when something is supposed to happen or it's not supposed to happen, but it is or is not happening. And so in me, I am expecting something to happen and it's not happening. And so that was the birthplace of the frustration. And so then I asked myself the question, does this man know what I expect? Have I communicated with him verbally my expectation? Because as a leader, you can walk around expecting people to do things, but you never communicated with them. So that frustration, which is a conflict, and And so know what the real issue is, I think, before you have a confrontation.
I heard a quote recently that said, in this generation, subtlety is dead. So those assumptions that there is clarity somewhere along the line, it's not there. It's not there. We don't live there anymore. We might have lived in a day but we don't live there anymore. It's dead. That art of subtlety is dead.
I think another principle is be honest about your personal motive. And, before confrontation, I really believe keeping the right spirit, your spirit right, is paramount in being able to enter a confrontation with the right frame of mind. So many times my own heart, the Bible says the heart is deceitfully wicked and no man can know it. And so sometimes I step into confrontation motivated by desire for control, or motivated by desire for revenge, motivated by desire that's not biblical, that is very carnal in nature. And in the spiritual realm, that's not going to produce a positive outcome. Mm-mm. That's going to actually set me back. And that meeting can potentially become explosive because it's a wrong motive in me. And as a leader, you give wrong motive in the hand and his heart's not right. Man, he can do a lot of damage in a heartbeat to the people that God's asked him to serve, not lord over.
Right.
And so it's very, very powerful. So be honest with myself and realign my motive and heart. And if God shows me, and God has shown me before, hey, your motive is wrong. And so before I ever confront somebody, I want to make sure that I'm right and square to Jesus Christ.
Right.
And so I remove the beam out of my own eye before I try to help get the speck out of somebody else's eye. So a great deal of introspection next. Go into confrontation with solutions and expectations to resolve the issue rather than just win. Confrontation is not a basketball game to win or lose. It's hopefully to move it forward. What are common mistakes people make when confronting? Well, I think avoiding conflict altogether because of fear. I think when fear is at the basis of why I'm not saying anything, I think we're probably off center there because of fear. Not having a big picture. We got to be guided by something bigger than just preference and personality. Again, these are common mistakes people have. How about assuming? Whenever you go into confrontation, you assume an individual knows that there is a conflict. Maybe they don't know. You assume, what are they doing? You assume we know people's motives. I don't know people's motives. We assume we know how people respond in the meeting. I don't know. We assume there's a winner or a loser rather than understanding and clear action. And we assume, this is a big one, we assume forgiveness is the fix or the end of the conflict. Saying I'm sorry and forgiving is one thing, but that doesn't necessarily, it's not the end of our confrontation. We've got to have change. In the confrontation, we shift toward emotion and away from rationality. And I think once emotion gets involved, it's very hard to keep it on track. Again, I think active listening in confrontation, whenever I get in there, asking questions leads to, showing respect. When you listen, you're showing respect. And I think when you show respect, it's safe for people. And that when you're listening to people, it helps you understand what questions to ask. When you ask the right questions, you can also get understanding of where people are or maybe how to move in a certain direction. I think in managing our emotions, I think one of the things that's important in a meeting, because you're dealing with passion and desire, I think have a goal of the meeting and stay true to the goal of that meeting. I think stay on task. Remember what's ahead of you. I think one of the challenges is in a meeting, if it's husband, wife, or if it's against you, that raw emotion. Number one, I think I have to wait for a pause to let them get it out, and so I can't get wound up in their emotion. I can't get caught up in their emotion, but understanding that it is a true outlet, as it were, of confrontation, and understand that emotional pop-off valve, an air compressor, it pumps up to a certain amount of pressure, let's say 120 PSI, and then it's got a pressure switch on it, and that thing will pop off as a safety valve. if there's too much pressure. I think our emotions are the same way. You can say, well, I'm going to control my emotions. But in marriages and situations, if this conflict isn't resolved, there becomes so much pressure internally that pop-off valve sometimes needs to pop off. And so I don't necessarily always shut down. Oh, don't get emotional on me. I just try to remind people, hey, there's a pop off. There's a point where we're in us. Man, people start crying. What's that? That's their pop off valve. And I personally recognize that I need that sometimes. Sometimes I need that pressure to be released because I'm human. And so I don't take that personal. And I try to remind people, hey, when you get to these moments, this is part of I think moving toward healthy conversation. If in fact it's just a release of emotion, then again, finding out how do I navigate through this, because a lot of times people don't confront those emotions, aren't allowed to come out, and so it's like a tea kettle. It's just like it just goes off. So I think helping people understand, how we're emotionally creature and how do I let that out. So that it's not damaging to people. Emotion is truly human, but if it's so hot when it comes out, it can hurt people. And so even in myself, and when I get around people that they haven't been given the opportunity to vent, again, I don't take that personal. I don't put them in hell. If they do vent, I recognize that maybe they probably don't have opportunity to let off that pressure.
So correct me if I'm wrong. When biologically in our bodies, adrenaline is forced into our system at an extreme level, there is a flight response with adrenaline. I know it can give mental clarity, but I think a lot of times it has to do with if I'm prepared for that. So if that is the case, the biological response when there is a spike in adrenaline is we have an emotional reaction. And a lot of times in conflict resolution, we don't want to deal with that. We don't want to deal with the feeling of that. Does that make sense? It's not even the action. It's like, I don't want to get to that place again. So as a leader, it's like, well, I don't like the way that feels. I don't like the way I feel when I'm dealing with conflict. And so I'm going to try to do everything I can to go around conflict instead of having to deal with it. And I'm not going to take the Paul approach and say, Timothy, listen, bro, we've got to deal with some things here. There's a legitimate fear here, and I'm going to have to confront you as a man of God, as a pastor, so that, you can move forward. Yeah.
I think also too, not having felt that adrenaline or that rush of emotion or whatever that fight or flight response is, if you're not in there enough, and, again, who knows how you're going to respond, number one. And it's just, I think confrontation in the home, that's the very first barrier you have to get over, is my reaction to conflict and being confronted. And you learn that response. That's not something that you just, I'm born knowing how to do. If you're never confronted, it's going to be difficult. Somebody's got to be patient enough with you to walk through and say, now look, here's what's happening in you and in me. And it's a safe spot. But let's learn how to navigate our emotions so that we can arrive at a common interest and a goal. Yeah, that's very good.
I really think that that's one thing that in the book, The Crucial Confrontations, that's one of the things he talks about is our tendency to lean into our normal biological response. And because, like you said, one, I don't know how, or two, I don't like the feeling when I do. And so A, fear, I'm not dealing with it. B, I don't like the way that conflict makes me feel, when really that is a spike of something that is biological, but you can learn how to navigate through that. Like you said, as a leader, you can allow that pressure switch to be pushed on their side. You have that ability to be able to decipher and see that the end is greater. And so we're going to allow things to play out. Now, I'm not saying just allow somebody to, to whatever. You get where I'm going with that without having to give examples. But yeah, I think that there are natural responses that the body will do, especially if this is not something you're comfortable with. But knowing that, I think you can navigate through that. And having practical tips like you're telling us, Like, okay, lean right here, understand right here, focus right here. As a leader, take in consideration where they are. Think about the end game here. Think about exactly what they're going through. Why would they be responding like this? Why would they be, and taking a step back and allowing some of those things to play out.
The final thing I would say about at least the church work, the Bible uses the word, let all of you be or subject or submit one to another. And I find that one of the greatest challenges for conflict resolution is our unwillingness to submit one to another. And so I think unity is the biggest thing in the Bible, but it requires submission one to another.
Is it pride? What is it? Is it the need for win? Is it?
I would say it's just flesh. I think it doesn't like to die. Self does not like to be second. And so in that unity, again, we're never more like Christ than when we submit one to another.
Yeah.
I have seen leaders that profess to be leaders. They will demand it of their people, but they themselves don't know how to walk in submission to their own church. They don't know how to say, I'm sorry. They don't know how to say, you know what, my attitude was wrong. They don't know how to identify their own pride. They don't know how to walk humbly as an example before their own people. We got preachers that can't even be reconciled, but demand reconciliation in their church. But they can't model it at their level, and I feel like, wow, if there anywhere, there ought to be submission one to another and the giving of my will and your will to the mold for unity, to the togetherness of unity. It ought to be modeled in leadership. It's got to be. It's amazing. Paul said, some of you guys are taking each other to court. You're suing each other. And he said, you can't even solve your own conflicts. You can't even navigate successfully through confrontation. He said, so you're taking out to an unbeliever. He said, what, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Are you kidding me? Why don't you pick somebody, the lowest person in the church, have them set in judgment seat, and you just submit yourself to them. It's all about submission. You submit to them, and whatever he says, you do it. Why? For the cause of God. It's bigger than you. It's bigger than your rights. It's about the kingdom of God.
Yeah, it's bigger than us.
Yeah, he said, man, why don't you suffer yourself? At the end of the day, if you can't find resolution, take a loss. Take a personal hit and just eat it. Wow. Are you serious?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a huge topic. But anyway.
So good. Bro, I know we've just kind of scratched the surface, and it's made me desire more of this subject matter. The book that Pastor Justin recommended, there's Crucial Confrontations and Crucial Conversations. Both of those are essential. Yeah, both of those are essential. Both of those are for any leader that wants to try to learn how to navigate principles. After listening to this podcast, go read those books. They're fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us on The Bottom Half is Red. Listen, I hope you have enjoyed your time with us today and gained something of value. If you love what you heard today, please do not forget to subscribe to our podcast and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. This helps us. Your feedback is incredibly crucial, and we want to improve on what we're doing and to bring you the best content possible. You can find us on Facebook, look us up, Instagram, even YouTube at The Bottom Half is Red. Hey, be sure to check the episode description for any links to any resources that we have mentioned during the show. You don't want to miss out. This podcast is a production of The Church Today here in the great city of Tulsa, and the executive producer is our very own David Tanderup. I hope you've had a fantastic time, and we look forward to having you with us again on our next episode of The Bottom Half is Red. We'll see you then.